Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Tina. I'm the Capability Building Coordinator for Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up is a not-for-profit organisation. Our purpose is to help fellow not-for-profits leverage the digital world to positively impact their communities. The digital world is expanding beyond IT, software, hardware, and digital marketing to new innovative service delivery and measuring social impact. Connecting Up believes that not-for-profits with the right tools and skills can and do achieve great things for their communities. We have a long history of affordable software, hardware, educational events, and group consulting. We partner with over 40 organisations to deliver high quality products and services specifically meeting the unique needs of the not-for-profit sector. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar Introduction to SharePoint, which will be presented by Mark Walters from Info Exchange. We'll start with a little bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type it into the questions box on your webinar panel and I'll be able to assist you. If you have any questions during the session, please also type it into the questions box and Mark will answer them in the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. Please note that your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you are on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to help you have the best experience. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you shortly after the webinar ends. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar. We'd appreciate it if you took a few minutes to provide us with some feedback. That's all from me for now. I'll pass it over to Mark to get things started. Thanks, Mark.
Hi everybody, I'm Mark Walters from Info Exchange. Info Exchange, I'll give you a very brief bit about us. We're a not-for-profit technology provider. We are now also partnered very tightly. In fact, Connecting Up and Info Exchange have now joined forces together. So we've become a very much larger organisation with a lot more capabilities to provide services to the not-for-profit sector. Info Exchange are a not-for-profit provider to the not-for-profit sector, and we are a not-for-profit ourselves. We purely work with the not-for-profit sector. We have a variety of programs that we run that are not directly related to each other, but we run digital inclusion workshops across the country. We have a client management system. Then we have a managed service provider team that provides services to the not-for-profit sector and the consulting arm that I'm a part of as well. So very brief background because this is a very long, deep session that we're going into, the introduction to SharePoint. So we at Info Exchange have migrated more than 200, it's probably getting closer to 300 not-for-profits now to Office 365 and SharePoint from organisations with, I think the smallest one I've worked with has an equivalent of 1.2 FTE headcount, up to organisations of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 seats. The agenda for today's webinar is going to be introducing SharePoint as a part of Office 365, letting you know what SharePoint Online is, letting you know how it's used across the sector, what are some of the key functions that are available within SharePoint, what limitations and challenges do you need to be aware of when you're going down the migration path, what alternative applications within the Office 365 suite can you use, what implementation considerations you need to take into account when you're going down the path of moving to SharePoint, what are the best practices and things to remember, and then some top tips and resources for you to have access to use yourselves. So, SharePoint is a part of the Office 365 family of products. As you can see from here, there are a large number of products within the family. You've got some products going from application automation and development, you've got collaboration products, you've got communication products, then you've got your Office suite sitting up there, like you can see there, Excel, Word, PowerPoint all sitting in there, so you get online versions of those. You get security and compliance centres to help you manage the security tighter of your information. quite a large amount of things in there, and it's all about helping teams work more effectively together, and that's what Office 365 provides. SharePoint's one of those pieces, and in part the glue to all of the Office 365 products. Microsoft have a roadmap that they publish on all of the development activities that they're working on to improve Office 365. We've had some great upgrades in the last 12 to 18 months, and it's on a continuous improvement cycle. There's releases from typically now fortnightly. We're getting new features and products released into the suite, so continually improving. And as you can see there from the roadmap, Microsoft keep us up to date with what's going on. So what is SharePoint? SharePoint Online, that's the blurb from Microsoft. You can see that it's a cloud-based service hosted by Microsoft. It's software as a service instead of having an on-premises platform. So it means that you're subscribing and you're reducing the imprint of your infrastructure within your systems, and it helps you reduce the amount of management you need to be able to do if you go to SharePoint Online as opposed to SharePoint on-premises. Common uses for SharePoint across the not-for-profit sector, and you'll see that they're sort of grouped together. We've got improved security, cloud-based storage. And so that can be a key thing for some people. Hey, we've got better security in the cloud than what we'd be able to implement on premises, because Microsoft are continually monitoring and managing that on our behalf. It's cloud-based, therefore it helps reduce our infrastructure on premises, so it helps us reduce our costs. It provides me with an internet and discussion boards and a knowledge base, so it's a way of communicating information to staff. It's mobile. You can access it from anywhere where you have an application or device that can access a web browser. It also has a lot of cool applications for mobile devices just to make things work better on those. It's got some good admin and management tools that you can use to improve your internal processes. It has business intelligence tools available within it. You've got project management tools and collaboration tools for when people are working together. Things that they have a basic project management tool within the system that's included at your not-for-profit fees. You've got the ability to set up various different partner portals for information sharing with both internal and external organisations. And for the key, it's replacing the need for a server and improving your document management. They are two of the key things that you're going to get out of doing a SharePoint implementation. And we highly recommend you looking at it, because they are some great benefits just there across those two. So SharePoint can be an intranet, so it becomes a platform for the organisation to communicate to all staff and serve up information that staff are going to find they're going to need access to. It has a series of different types of sites, team sites and project sites, and it helps support teams working together by giving them a central place where everything related to what they're doing sits. So you can see there we're talking about, you can have task lists that integrate with your calendars. You can keep your documents there. If you're running projects, you can have things like useful other tools that people should be looking at when they're on the project. One of the great things I find out of it is if you come onto a project 2/3 of the way through, if the information's been correctly put into SharePoint, it means I get up to speed on the project a lot quicker. The administration process is one of the things that a lot of people find exciting, because you can create forms and lists with workflows to manage business processes. For example, if you're a small not-for-profit that doesn't have a fully blown HR system, you can put a leave process within SharePoint where staff can request leave. The leave goes to an approver who approves it. It then goes across to your payroll personnel to process it. And it can then be used to update a centralised calendar so that everyone can see who's currently on leave. Document management is one of the key components of the Office 365 SharePoint solution, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that later in this webinar, but it gives you a reasonably sophisticated way of working with documents now. Like I said, we'll get deeper into that later in this session. So we can see there are a couple of examples of SharePoint as an intranet. They're similar but different. You can see that different people want to use it in different ways, but you'll notice there's a lot of branding. So you're able to brand your SharePoint intranet to your organisation branding, and you determine what sort of and style of information you're going to provide through that. Up the top there, we've got an example of an intranet that just has an embedded video that's likely to come from maybe a website, like the CEO message might be posted on your intranet. You can have that embedded on your intranet so staff all see it. There's an announcement boards and upcoming events. The next one down, titled Inside Play, you can see there's a calendar over there. Yammer's integrated in, and they've also got a news board. And then for SMB, they've got a HR portal that helps the HR department work better together. You've got information sharing available through your intranet, and that can be things like putting up a knowledge base, giving staff access to all of your policies and procedures in a simple single spot. We know one of the issues staff can have is, how do I know this policy exists? Nobody's told me about it, or now I know it exists, I want to read it, where do I find it? So structuring your information well in SharePoint helps eliminate a lot of that. You can have blog posts from your CEO. So the CEO might want to be communicating to all staff, but not want to be running stand-up meetings every week or every month. So that gives a way for the CEO to interact with everybody and make everybody feel like they're a part of a group. Probably great when you've got an organisation that's spread across multiple sites. And you can put up things like news boards and all charts. It's all about helping your people find the information they need to find to do their job as simply and easily as it can be. You can have collaboration sites, and here's an example that we put together for Kids Undercover that was all about them collaborating on projects. So you've got project tasks, you've got discussion boards where people can be chatting, you've got your documents that people can now work on together, and you can see there we mentioned co-authoring on documents. One great feature within the document solution within Office 365 is you no longer have Mark's doing an edit and Mark needs to then send that to Tina for Tina to do her change, who sends it across to Jill to make her change, who sends it over to Andrew to make his, and now we're lost where the document is. In Office 365 you get co-authoring, where multiple people can work together on a single document. We've seen up to 30 people working on a single document. Microsoft claimed that you can have, with a few thousand, I can't remember the exact number, working on a single document at the same time. So you can see now processes are going to be simplified. Management of information is going to be a lot simpler and a lot easier to do. And here's some examples of collaboration. So there's a board subsite up the top there, and the idea is we're telling the board when meetings are coming up. They've got a list of contacts that they need to get access to. There's some links hidden in behind there to centralise. You can see on the bottom slide, quick links in the bottom middle. That's a list of commonly used links, so people don't have to know where to go to find resources. You give the information to them. You can see there's a nice discussion board happening there. That's great, like I said, for people coming onto your project at a later date. And you'll see in the middle there a rather sophisticated looking project management structure and layout with tasks, subtasks. Those tasks get assigned to people with dependencies. So it's an out-of-the-box, cheap, as in for not-for-profits, it starts at free, project management tool. You're all of a sudden seeing all of these great features that you're getting from SharePoint at a great price. administration, managing processes really is what we're talking about there, your office administration processes. So, a new starter comes into the organisation, there's a variety of things that need to happen to get that new starter set up. So you build a new starter form and you have processes through that automates tasks and alerts and notifications that record when people have completed activities. So you now have a single place where you can say, hey, this new starter request was submitted Friday. Who's working on it today? What stage is it within the workflow? I need to get it fast tracked because the person's starting early. You can maintain an asset register within the system, great little place to keep information like that, centrally registered. Things like issues logs, I mentioned leave requests earlier, maintenance requests, all of these sort of things that you do within an organisation where you're shuffling paper around or sending emails around. You can automate this through SharePoint, through the other tools that come online, such as Flow and Power Apps. So it's a great way of starting to make your business run, or your organisation, run a lot more efficiently. So we can see in here some examples. We've got, requesting credit notes. So why are you requesting it? Who's requesting it? What stages? You can see in there we've got the variety of statuses. So it's been approved by a manager, it's waiting business unit approval, etc., etc. You can see where every request is within the process flow. In the middle there, just a simple staff IT request. Hey, what do I want? When do I want it? And where is it? Or a more complex form, the new starter administration form. And that form has a variety of different views of that form depending where it is within the workflow. So you're able to, remember our old paper forms would have a section down the bottom for office use only. An example that we were shown in one of the demonstrations from Microsoft was a building form for building works, and it was a 65-page Word document with about 20 different people having to enter things at different stages. They were able to simplify that in SharePoint lists and automate a lot of the processing and therefore eliminate the paper need. You think now if you're eliminating paper, you're storing things electronically, which now means you can also find things a lot quicker because you can search for them, as opposed to if somebody misfiled them in the paper system. You now have the fun of going through everything hoping to find what you're looking for. Document management. Like I said earlier, we're going to spend a little bit more time on document management here now, because document management is one of the great features in SharePoint. So documents are stored in SharePoint libraries. And if you have a look at your desktop, you'll be noticing that Microsoft have been starting to introduce us all to the term library for a while now. And this was where it was leading everyone towards. So you can have many document libraries on your SharePoint with different permissions for each of those document libraries, from everyone has full access to this is restricted to these two people and these two people only. Therefore, you're able to now replace your file server because you're storing your documents in SharePoint. You can have offline access to the files if you wish, using one of the other features of the Office 365 product suite, their OneDrive sync tool. And that sync tool is all about synchronizing a local copy of a file with the online copy of the file and ensuring that whenever anybody's looking for something, they're always looking at the most current recent version of the file. As I mentioned earlier, there's co-authoring, and that was a game changer for a lot of organisations. One organisation that I work with, they regularly have situations where the CEO is travelling from one meeting to another and needs some document updates to be done. And it used to be send an email to the person to do the document updates. They do the updates, send an email back saying they've been done. She then looks at it and says, sorry, I need this changed and this changed and this changed. It goes back to be changed and then gets sent back. Now the CEO sits there on their tablet, their iPad. They're working on the document using the iPad MS Word tool. Their EA is sitting at the other end working on the document at the same time. They're using Skype for Business to chat to each other while they're working on the document, and therefore they've now become a lot more efficient and effective. They're getting the document updated a lot quicker, reducing a lot of stress for the CEO and for the staff members that are trying to help get everything done. You can store almost every single type of file you wish to store on a file server in SharePoint. There are a few minor limitations. Those limitations are all related to how the web works. An example of that is I had an organisation complaining a couple of months ago that they'd lost a heap of files on SharePoint, and what they'd done is they'd put underscore files as the file path name. That is a reserved word for the web. Underscore files is where the web stores all of its files. So they created a folder called blah blah underscore files, and it automatically became hidden by SharePoint. So although we stayed all file types, there can be a few little tweaks and things to watch for. Not a lot. There's an image gallery document library, which is a very specific style of document library, because it gives you things like thumbnail views, as opposed to just a standard document library, which just shows you the list of the documents as you can see on the side there. You can categorise data information now using metadata instead of using the old traditional folders and files. At Info Exchange, we recommend a blend of both styles of document storage, because the amount of change, particularly within our sector, to bring everyone across to using tagging of documents is rather large. And you will find a lot of people would struggle with it. So we recommend horses for courses, documents that are centrally managed, and the idea is their information to staff. For example, your forms, your templates, your policies and procedures, training guides and the likes. We recommend you store them in a document library with metadata, because it helps people discover what they want very quickly. If things are tagged properly, they're very easy to find. You can also attach to all of your documents the concept of major and minor versions. And the whole idea of that is you go down the path of saying, I've got a published version of my file, that's the major version. While people are editing it, they're the minor versions, and therefore people with read-only access won't see the minor versions while the document's being worked on. It then goes through an approval process to get the document approved for publishing, and then when it's published, it automatically becomes the current version for the file, and everybody that opens it now sees that version. So you're no longer sitting back having V2, V2.1, V2.2, V3, V final, V4, V5, V5.1, V6, V6.3, V final 2, V7. How do I know what version of that is the most current version of the document? If I keep it in SharePoint, I have a document, and in behind it, you let SharePoint control and store all of those different versions. With the versioning, you get the ability to recover different versions of the file. So if you have multiple versions of a file and you feel at some stage the need to replace because somebody made a bad edit or an incorrect edit, it's as simple as going into your version history and recovering the previous version of the file. What that then does within the system is it takes the version that you're recovering and makes it the current version and demotes the previous version. So you're not overriding anything, you're not losing anything in case you make a bad decision. Very, very powerful tool that. It saves a hell of a lot of confusion. Yeah, we've all got multiple versions of files floating around and we've all got them named. But if I see a V6 and a V5 and the V5 has been modified more recently than the V6 file, how do I know what is the current one? Whereas within SharePoint, the current one is the published copy of the document. Now, you don't have to introduce major and minor versioning on all document libraries. You can say, hey, for this document library, every change is a major version, so just implement major versioning. Whereas for these documents, we do go through a draft and approval process. That's when you introduce major and minor versioning. And you can see there's the version history of this document showing who modified it and when they last modified it. You can recover very quickly from there. Now we've popped over to co-authoring. Now this is a slightly old slide. The screens look a lot different now, but we haven't updated the screens yet because Office 2019 is on its way and that changes things a little bit more. But when co-authoring occurs, you'll see a list of all of the people that are currently co-authoring, and you'll also see where they're working. You can see here there's a little box on the left near costs, and that's showing that this person is editing that part of the document. In the current version, Office 2016, they colour each paragraph that people are editing. So the way the co-authoring works is it locks the paragraph that the person's working on, and that person and only that person can be editing that paragraph. So you'll quickly see where people are working together on a document, and you can see what a game changer that will be, particularly for those that have people work from multiple sites. I can see who's currently editing in the document together with me. I can now start talking to them about the changes they're making, and we can change the document in one session instead of in multiple sessions. Offline syncing. Offline syncing has been greatly improved in the last, 7 months with the 4 Creators update to Windows 10. It introduced a new feature called Files on Demand. What the syncing tool is doing is it's ensuring that there's a copy of the document stored on your local device that is the same version of the file that's stored in the cloud. And what it does is it synchronises the changes between either you making edits, pushing them up to SharePoint, or somebody else making edits and pushing it down to you. Before Files on Demand arrived, a lot of people were reluctant on going to SharePoint because they said that it was a very chatty tool that chewed up all my internet bandwidth. It wasn't actually SharePoint that did that. What was doing it was the fact that they were local syncing. And what would happen is you'd have, say 20 people all syncing a single document library. They're all interested in the information in that document library. One of those team would make an edit to a 20 meg file. So their edit gets pushed up to SharePoint. And then the other 19 people in the organisation that were also syncing that folder get a copy pushed down to them. So you can see all of a sudden that was a hell of a lot of internet traffic happening to keep those files up to date. With the new introduction of Files on Demand, it no longer syncs the file, it syncs the file's metadata. And therefore the tool's intelligent enough to know from that whether the version of the document on the local computer is up to date or not. And it knows then if the person needs to edit the document, it knows when to go and do a refresh from the cloud or not. There's switches available for you with that where you can say, no, I always want to keep a local copy of this, as opposed to I only want to keep what we're calling the skeleton. And the skeleton is all of the key metadata about the document, the name, the folder, create dates and names, modified dates and names, what types of files they are, all of those things. When I was testing this, I had a document library of 358 meg of files. When I set it up as Files on Demand, the footprint on my local computer was 16 kilobytes of data. Therefore, any changes that people were making was only pushing under a kilobyte of data backwards and forwards across the internet. So that was a game breaker for organisations, particularly in Australia where we do have poor internet. You can now sync, work with files locally, and one of the reasons we like this is the interface is an interface that all of our staff are familiar with. You're accessing it from File Explorer. It looks like you're accessing it from a shared drive. So it makes it less change for staff. yet get you all of the benefits of migrating to SharePoint in the cloud. The file storage for SharePoint is very large. Within Office 365, every account that you have adds to your storage. Now, every user gets their own OneDrive for Business space allocated to them, which is 1 terabyte of data for them, storage for them to use. It's not expandable. It's private to them. You can share from your OneDrive, but the initial setup is it belongs to the user and only to the user, like your old home drives or personal drives on a file server. Then you've got SharePoint, which commences with, they've increased it from 1 terabyte now to, I think the starting point's 2 terabytes with your 50 meg per licensed user. You can also purchase additional storage if required. That additional storage is provided at not-for-profit pricing as well. And you can store all sorts of things up there. So it's a great place to put things, and as we stated, it's centrally managed, as in it's in a location that everybody can access. Therefore, it's intended for files that you're sharing. It's just growing and growing and growing. And then you can see down the bottom, we can say, hey, and if you need to work offline, and by offline, it's somewhere where I won't have reliable internet connection, you use the sync tool to be able to take a copy of the file with you on your desktop. And all that'll happen is the next time you connect to the internet, the sync tool will then go wave its magic and keep the version of the file in SharePoint up to date. The one issue that you can have is if you're working offline on a file, and while you're working on it offline, somebody else modifies the online version of the file, the sync tool now doesn't know whose updates were the most recent, so it goes and creates a copy of the file. That's probably the worst thing that can happen with the sync tool, because it now means you have to manually merge those two documents together. It's not often that you get to a spot where you're trying to do some work where you don't have any internet access of any sort nowadays, but it's just a little thing that you need to be aware of. So, SharePoint, what's its limitations and challenges? It's not suitable for every organisation, because every organisation doesn't have the need for these large collaboration and communication products. Some of them are happy with, we all sit in the office together, we just talk to each other. Whereas others, it's we're a disparate organisation with multiple different roles and multiple different teams, and how do we make it feel like a single organisation together? That would be one of your key drivers to say, hey, we need an intranet, and let's look at how SharePoint can become our intranet. It is a different user experience than a file server. Yes, it's storing your files in the cloud, but you're either interacting with it via the web interface, or you're using the file sync to your local computer. Some of the big changes that for the end user experience is things like the versioning, and why don't I create multiple copies of files anymore? That can be a very large cultural change. The sync tool can occasionally have errors that need to be managed. One of them was what I mentioned before of when you go offline, but there can be a variety of reasons why the sync tool can break. One of those is what's mentioned in the next point, the number of character limits. The web in Microsoft's world now can accept up to 400 character limits for the file name and the full syncing path. So you think on the web, you've got https://www.infoexchange.sharepoint.com/team name/library name/folder/folder/folder/file name. All of those characters are involved in the 400 character limit, and some of those are involved in the 250 character limit when you're syncing. Microsoft have made a change to Windows 10 that I haven't tested for 2 months that was supposed to increase the character limit on the Windows desktop from 250 characters to unlimited. My set of tests highlighted some issues with that with Microsoft that they were then going through. So at the moment, we still stick with 250 characters is the maximum path length if you're syncing a file. Now, we all remember on the file server where you get a, sorry, your file name's too long for the path, and people go and map a drive further down to be able to save. And all that does is create issues for your IT department if there's document recovery needed. There's a limit when you're syncing in SharePoint on the number of files, well, on the number of items you can have in a document library. And this is difficult to fully calculate. The limit per document library for syncing is 20,000 items. A file's an item, a folder's an item. We can very easily count the number of files. We can't very easily count the number of folders. So I always recommend keeping it to under 15,000 files per document library and managing that. It's usually not a lot of management, because when you do your design and set up your structure, you'd be targeting probably a lot lower than that for each document library, because like I said, there's no limitation to the document library, number of document libraries you can have. Yes, you've got your terabyte of storage, but they become key things to think about when you're designing your SharePoint solution. One of the SharePoint limitations is creating a new document library requires somebody who understands SharePoint. So sometimes it's no longer an IT function, which can be great for the business because it's helping free up the IT department to focus on real IT things. This is configuration, configuring in a new document library. So it requires somebody to become the champion and the administrator to look after all of that stuff, and then getting them trained up on what they need to be doing. And what is not just the technical what, but it's also the business what, which really is the why. Why am I creating this document library? Why am I locking the permissions down to this group? Where am I going to store it for ease of access so that people can find it? You will need to train your staff on the document management processes. And if you're using forms for business automation or using lists within SharePoint to capture other information, there is training that you're going to need to provide, and it is change. The migration to SharePoint is time consuming and is definitely not simple. There are tools out there to help make it as simple as possible for you, but there's a lot of things you need to do to prepare for a migration, and things that you need to take into account. Like, you need to know the volume of data that you're going to be migrating, the speed of your internet connection to work out how you're going to migrate the data. The good news is it used to be that migration tools were an outgoing expense for you. Microsoft have now introduced their own migration tool for migrating documents to SharePoint. They provide it free. They've also recently did a very, very large revamp of the tool to make it a lot simpler and to fix a few of the bugs that it had. It's quite good, and for what you pay, it's very good, given that they provide it free of charge. But that's where, once again, you've got a lot of planning to do, you've got a lot of management to do around your documents. You need to manage the permissions carefully in SharePoint. Permissions are a key to providing access to the information they need, and you need to know what style of permissions and who's accessing what. And the idea is you group things together based on who's going to have permissions to things. So part of your upfront design should be around who's going to have access and what style of access. And remember, there's 3 types of access: read access, where people can view but can't modify files; edit access, where they can view and make changes and create new files; and the third one, no access. So if you're restricting things down that people have no access, make sure you understand why, and make sure when these people come screaming to you saying, I need to access this, you know why they're not allowed to access it. Within Office 365, there's many tools to do the one thing, and it's all about the tool that suits the purpose of what you're doing. So you can see now with collaboration and document management for small teams, do I need SharePoint or can I use Office 365 Teams or Groups instead of SharePoint? It reduces my implementation costs considerably. Therefore, it might be a path for you to go down just the Teams and Groups side path instead of building a full-blown intranet. An example of that would be, say, a small organisation of 4 or 5 staff where you have one person who does all finance and HR, and then everybody else just works together. So you just be able to quickly create an Office 365 team for the HR department to store their information, and then quickly create another one for all staff to store all of their information. But you've got the similar limitations within the document storage that you do with SharePoint on number of characters for paths and number of files per document library. But once again, within Teams and Groups, it's very easy for people to add another document library. Discussions and collaboration. Other than having a SharePoint discussion board, news board, blog, you can use Yammer or you can use Teams. Teams is becoming the tool of choice, and Teams is where Microsoft is moving everyone towards. And yeah, it has some great features and functions itself, and it's continually being improved. You can have calendars in SharePoint for rooms and equipment and likes, or you can just set them up in Exchange like you potentially do now, where people then invite the meeting room to the meeting and it either accepts or rejects based on its availability. You can see once again intranet and document collaboration for staff and or boards. We're once again mentioning that you can use Office 365 Teams or Groups for that. Same thing. Business intelligence and reporting. At the moment, I'm sure a lot of you are building graphs and reports through Excel. We now have access to a product called Power BI. And Power BI is a data visualization tool, BI for business intelligence. And it's a way of being able to have published dashboards, and you can therefore be refreshing the data once in the background and have it published on a dashboard on SharePoint through Power BI. So therefore, instead of somebody collating and updating a spreadsheet and remembering it to email to everybody and then everybody remembering to be looking at the most current version of the spreadsheet, you publish your Power BI dashboard and all you're doing is a single refresh of the data and everything else happens for you. You've got some individual documents, your old H drive, that you can now be storing in OneDrive for Business instead of setting up SharePoint team libraries that would be locked down for individuals. You've got forms available in Office 365, and there's 2 styles of forms in Office 365 now. Actually 4 if you count out of the box. InfoPath was a tool that was developed, I think from memory, with SharePoint 2003. It was to be retired in 2018. It's now going to be extended to 2026. It's a little bit old school in its forms compared to Power Apps, which presents a much richer looking interface to the users. And then you've got forms, which is just a simple survey style form where the information's not collated and stored in a list. It's collated and stored with the form, and that can be used for things like simple surveys or simple requests. Project management, you can either use the task lists that were in SharePoint or Office 365 Planner, which is a lot more powerful tool that gives you a lot more project management features. You've got Delve, which is the search tool. And I forgot to mention earlier with the document library, so I'll bring it up now that we're talking with search. Search in Office 365 is way better than any search experience you would have on a file server. On a file server, when you were searching for files, you had to know part of the file name or you wouldn't find anything. In Office 365, it searches for the text within the file. If the file is a PDF, Word, PowerPoint, or Excel file, it gives you filters to filter down, and it gives you the ability to preview the file before you open it. You know, to me, they're game changers. When I do a search and I couldn't find the document based on file name, you end up giving up. Whereas in SharePoint, I can go, hey, yeah, I know that it was a Word file, that it was authored by this person, that it was created within the last 6 months, and all of a sudden I get a very narrow search and I can do my preview of the document. No, it wasn't that one. No, it wasn't. That's the one that I wanted. Much quicker to find the information you want. You can store videos within Office 365 SharePoint document libraries, or you can use the Office 365 video platform. The advantages of the Office 365 video platform is it works similar to a YouTube channel, in that what happens in the background when you load a new video is it creates multiple different versions of that at different scale. So it'll then know that when the user logs in and wants to look at the video, it'll recognise the device that they're on and the internet connection that they're on, and serve up a version of the video that's most appropriate. So it's not going to try and pump down a 1080i video to somebody on an ADSL link that's only got a 1 or 2 meg download speed. So it makes things a lot simpler and a lot easier. Messaging and video communication. Skype for Business still exists to do some of those features, but Microsoft are in the process of migrating it to Teams. So I'd be suggesting, if you're looking for messaging and video collaboration nowadays and communications, investigate Teams. The SharePoint features and functionality is being deprecated. Local storage of large files and apps. As I mentioned, SharePoint's web-based. It's like any cloud product. It has its pros and cons, and it all depends on what sort of an internet you have. Do you have sufficient internet for the number of people it'll be accessing? So you might decide that you keep a NAS or a server for certain things. So, is an intranet the best tool to solve your problem? Are you ready for this new way of working? Do you have buy-in from staff and management? So you need to be able to articulate why and where does SharePoint fit with all of the other tools and products that I have. Here's a set of questions that you can go through when you're trying to set up your SharePoint on the sort of things that you should be taking into account for your design. And remember, the whole idea of these sort of things is to help people work more efficiently. So that's why we ask about who is going to be using it. It's not who's building it, it's who's using it. Because we've only got 10 minutes, I'm rushing a little bit through these last slides, but it's not worth me reading every word on there. I think that's quite clear and concise, but if there's any questions at the end, we'll go through them. How do you implement? Do you have the capability and capacity to implement SharePoint? And remember, implementation is not just a technical, it's also a business process. Any implementation is all about making sure the business is ready and that the business is going to commit. Do you need an external partner to help you? Somebody who understands how to gather the requirements for SharePoint, how to put it together, and how to help you with your change management. Who's going to manage things in the future? Who will be in charge of migrating the content? And one of the things that we always recommend with the SharePoint implementation is, here is the opportunity to revisit the information that you have, in particular your files, and work out which files are no longer relevant. We recommend only keeping the most recent version of a file on SharePoint. Don't bring in all of its previous history. with your V1, V2, V2.2, etc., unless you can justify it. What sort of training is going to be required? As a minimum, I'd recommend half-hour training to staff if you're just doing documents. And that would be if you're doing small sessions, groups of 4 or 5. Any longer than that, you're looking at just the work with documents. I recommend an hour training. How are you going to manage the change of introducing a SharePoint intranet? A very, very key component. It's great that we have these great ideas and want to bring in these new tools, but without good change management, you don't get good buy-in, and therefore you're going to end up with staff creating systems in and amongst themselves to work with. Here's your key implementation stages. So find your internal champion and your partner, develop your business case and get it approved. Do a review of what you're trying to do and scope it. Do a review of the content that you're going to be bringing across and plan your migration. Do your SharePoint design. It's all about your information architecture and your sitemap and your permission structure. And notice the design includes permissions. Do your SharePoint build. Do your training of your administrators and champions. And the whole idea of champions is having someone at each site or within each team that agrees that SharePoint's great and they're there to help champion and help you make the change smooth. Do a pilot group and do some testing. Is this going to work? Have we got the design right? Have we got the permissions right? Have we got the structure right? Then start migrating your information. Then do your launch and training. And then, like any new product that you introduce, you do your ongoing evaluation and management. Here's an example of doing a SharePoint design where we talk about having a top-level site, sub-sites for different departments and programs, a various set of document libraries and lists, and in some cases, sub-sites under sub-sites under sub-sites. You can nest sites. The example here is fundraising and communications with the brand refresh project. So this is a project that we're doing. Let's keep it under fundraising and comms, but let's keep it separate because not every member of the fundraising and comms department is working on the branding refresh project. Your governance. Decide who can provide the information on who can access what. Determine what needs to be restricted. And as we say, only lock down what has to be locked down. Remember, the name of the tool is SharePoint. So it's all about sharing. So the whole idea is you try and share as much information as you can with as much of the organisation as you can. Establish clear lines of responsibility for access to content. Make sure that you know who is the only person or people who can approve changes to permissions. There's nothing worse than Jill coming up and saying, I need access to this document urgently, give me permissions to it, and you don't know who the manager or owner of that information is. Do you then provide them permissions, or are you about to introduce a serious risk? That's why we talk about the practicalities of an overhead of managing silos. And as we say, who's going to manage the permission changes? Change management, all about engagement, finding your champions, doing your pilot, generate excitement and hype. One of the things we find is good is, run little surveys to get staff to come up with names for what your intranet is. Make it something that makes people excited and generate that excitement, because an excited group of people are going to be more adaptable to change than a group of people that are sitting down saying, this is the first time I've heard of this. Why are you dumping this new thing on me? Do some good training and demo sessions. Make sure that you have good help areas and documentation on how people can use it. Stage your implementation if at all possible. Make sure that you engage everybody who's going to be using the system as much as you can all the way through. It really is one of those, if I communicate a lot, I'll get a lot of excitement. If I get a lot of excitement, I'll get buy-in. If I get buy-in, I'll get use. If I get use, I'm a happy person. And here's some tips on how you can generate some of that excitement and some of the things that you should be doing to make your SharePoint implementation a success. It covers some of the things that we've already talked through this webinar. Things like setting up different parts of SharePoint for different parts of your organisation, using lists to streamline your IT processes, using metadata where practical, ensuring that staff understand the benefits of bringing this in and that they have local champions that help guide them, and they'll be the people that become your super users within their group. If you need, make sure you get yourself attached to a SharePoint expert, someone who's done multiple migrations and has learned from experience on the pitfalls and knows how to help you and how to help train your staff and how to help you get your change management happen and how to help you generate the excitement. One of the big things you should be looking at as a part of implementation is changing some of your practices. One of those keys will be your naming protocols. As I mentioned, we get rid of V1, V2, V final. If you've got large video files or custom line of business applications, you are going to need to keep a server. So keep that in your mind when you're trying to sort out your information architecture and where SharePoint fits in that. Complement SharePoint. It's not just used on its own. You're going to find that you're going to have times where Yammer's going to be more appropriate, or Teams is going to be more appropriate, or our client record management system is where we should be keeping that information, not in SharePoint. So make sure that everything you implement has a clear purpose and will add value to the organisation. And our final slide, just some points to some resources that you can go to get some extra information and the likes. So as you can see, this was a very, very long session of you listening to me talk for an hour. Thank you all for listening in, and now's our opportunity to have a look at any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Mark. We did have a few questions come through. The first one is, what is the maximum number of documents you can have in a list?
The maximum number of documents, there is no limitation. You can have millions of documents in a single document library. It's just then staff won't be able to sync them to be able to access them via the familiar tool, and you will start finding that you have some management hiccups when they get too large. That's why I stated earlier, try and keep them around the 15,000. It helps you with the ongoing management.
Okay, the next one is to do with document libraries as well. We use Adobe Creative Cloud, Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator. Would the file types be okay?
With some, yes. With some of those products, no. One of the things with something like your InDesign is InDesign uses a package. So there's multiple files included in the single package. And that's where designing your SharePoint properly and then having to use the sync tool is important to you. So they can be problematic, but once again, there's ways of working with them. So you could say we store them all in SharePoint. When Jill needs access to them, Jill does a download of all of the files in the package, checks them out in SharePoint because you can check them out so that nobody else has access, carries out the work that's needed, uploads the files, and then checks them back in. So it's adding steps to the process for things like that. If you're just using it for basic PDF documents, yes, you won't have a problem. It's when you're using, the more publishing style features out of there where there's tips and tricks that you need to work with.
Okay, can files on SharePoint be public facing, the equivalent of uploaded to a platform like ISSUU?
Yes. Within SharePoint, there's 3 different security models. You can have a blend of these security models across your organisation. I've done it for one organisation that I implemented SharePoint to, where we have one area that's locked down so that things can only be shared with staff members, people that have an Office 365 account with the organisation. Then we've set up the extranet where they can share with people who sign in, and they go and create an account in the background that's free of charge for them to be able to access. And that's things that you want to share with external partners, but you only want to share with a restricted limit of partners. And then you have the concept of anonymous, where anyone that can find the URL can access the file. For the organisation that I set that up, what they have is they want to be creating content that's displayed on their website, and they don't want to have to keep uploading and downloading files left, right and centre across. Setting up the anonymous sharing means all they had to do was paste the link in the website, and any refreshes they do to the document in SharePoint are immediately reflected when somebody clicks on that link on the web page. So you can achieve all of the types of sharing that you wish to achieve.
Okay, can you please mention some of the migration tools to help migrating documents and photographs? Do they cross-match metadata with SharePoint Online too?
The only tools that can do the metadata mapping are the big end of town, where you're looking at your ShareGate style product, which aren't cheap. There's Microsoft's tool that's free, Microsoft SharePoint migration tool, free of charge, and we'll do a simple from this folder to this place in this document library. You've got Files to Go, which is had been my tool of choice for the last few years in the not-for-profit sector. It's very simple to use. It costs $800 for you to be able to build batch files. That's $800 US for you to be able to build batch files and set up your migration as a batch, which is the same thing you can do with the Microsoft tool and the ShareGate tool. The Files to Go up until about 8 months ago was the only option. The Microsoft tool didn't exist. Now that the Microsoft tool exists and it's had a big upgrade, that's going to become our tool of choice, because we work for the not-for-profit sector and we don't want to spend your money unnecessarily. So we look at the cheapest, the most cost-effective option. The first time I used the Microsoft tool, it also took 10.5 hours of my time, whereas Files to Go took about 20 minutes of my time. So the recommendations are start with SharePoint migration tool. If that doesn't meet your need, look at Files to Go. If that doesn't meet your need, you're then going to the big boys, the big end of town, your ShareGates, your Nintex, etc. One thing that all of those tools do migrate when they migrate is create dates and modified dates. One thing they all have problems migrating across is the usernames, because the usernames in your on-premises system won't match the usernames that you have in Office 365.
Okay, what is an average project timeframe for transitioning from a file server to SharePoint document management from start to finish?
It depends on the size and complexity of your organisation. Small organisations of 10 to 20 staff, you would spread the migration over a period of 3 to 4 weeks. The first week is where you'd be talking to people and getting your design right. The second week would be where you're building and prototyping and getting sign off. The third week would be where you do your migration, and then I always recommend you migrate on a weekend and train on the Monday morning. So that's a small organisation. The largest organisation that we work with, the SharePoint project, was a 6-month project. There was iterations through design. There was taking into account future organisation changes. So it was building something that was flexible. It was building something that was supportable by the local in-house team. Therefore, there was a lot more training involved in that. We were migrating around about 750,000 files across around about 65 different document libraries through 30 different team sites. So it was a complicated migration. And during that 6 months, they also did a review of all of the documents that they had in each department and worked out what they needed. So it can be quick and easy, or it can be long, drawn out, and give you great benefits. It's horses for courses, depending on your size and the complexity of your organisation.
Okay, last question. Our SharePoint loads pages very slowly and our internet connection is strong. Can we speed this up?
You'd have to have a look at what information you've got on those pages. If you've got a lot of images, what's likely happen is the images haven't been scaled, i.e. shrunk down to a much smaller size, because a web page can render a small image a lot better than a printed page. I've seen people take the images that they created in high def, high res, put 24 meg images on the page, tell SharePoint to scale them, and SharePoint scales them after rendering. So it does depend on what information you've got on the page on why those pages are loading slowly.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Was there anything you wanted to add before we finish off?
Just that I came from a background in 2003 where anytime somebody mentioned SharePoint, we all started job hunting. I ran from SharePoint like nobody's business. Once SharePoint Online was introduced, I had a look at it and I went, Microsoft have got it right. It's not perfect, but boy, is this a good product and a good tool to use. And for the not-for-profit sector, I think you really, really should take it into consideration, because it can help you free up IT resources to work on more important things than managing file shares and file servers. It means that you can have a mobile workforce, which we know is a lot more needed in this day and age, where people need to be out delivering services to make sure that the funding's coming in. And it just works. I've been working with it now at Info Exchange for over 4 years and have fully embraced it. So coming from a background where I didn't think much of the tool, I now think it should be something that everyone puts in their tool belt.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark, for presenting today, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you've all learnt a lot from this presentation and that all of your questions have been answered. If you do have any questions that come to mind later or any feedback, please send that through to events@connectingup.org and we'll answer those questions offline. You can also contact Mark directly via the information on your screen. Don't forget that the recording will be available on our website very shortly and a link will be sent to you, so keep an eye out on your inbox. Again, thank you for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your day and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone.